typically what I see people do is they go straight to the top of the pyramid and they worry about things like what times should I eat and how many meals should I have a day and what supplements should I take, instead of focusing on things like energy balance, where the fat loss actually comes from.
All right, welcome Hustle and Fit family. I have another great interview today. I'm really excited to get this started. This is an opportunity for you to learn strategies, tips, and tricks to basically get the body that you want and pretty much develop your overall nutrition. Today I have a special guest. His name is Joey Cantlin. He's a personal trainer, accredited sports nutritionist, and a strength coach, and he's also a business owner as well. So he's kind of doing the whole thing. Essentially, and I basically want to welcome in here today for joining the Hustle and Fit interview series. How's it going, Joey?
Thanks, David. I'm very happy to be here. It's going well.
Awesome. So, I mean, just kind of thinking off the top, just looking at what you've been doing and everything like that. So, you specialize mostly in meal prepping for competitions. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, majority. Over the course of the years, it's kind of swayed more towards contest preparation for bodybuilders, fitness models, bikini athletes, etc. But I did start out with mostly the general population, and I do still do a little bit work with that because I do enjoy it. But majority is contest prep now, just due to the demand and the growth in the sport as well.
Wow, so that's amazing. So, I mean, that's a big thing because a lot of us would love to have some of the bodies that we look and see on Instagram and everything like that. Yeah. So the one question is, how realistic is it for the average person to kind of get a look like somebody ready for a competition? That's kind of like the first initial question, I would say.
Well, I guess everyone kind of has to start somewhere. So everyone who eventually gets on stage or got on stage in the past was average, or what you would consider to be an average person at one point. I would say that it's for someone to just get into that shape and just maintain that look or continue to look like that all of the time. It's totally unrealistic because while people see the body, they see the photos and they see the training and whatnot, it all looks, all rosy and stuff like that. It's actually really rough. It feels a lot worse than it looks.
Oh, wow. Seriously. Wow. That's crazy. So, I mean, like, how much prep time goes into, like, from the beginning of the program all the way into stage? Like, what does it take to get from there all the way to the stage there?
Well, I mean, it just like everything with life, it all depends on where you're starting. I know for some people, I get some clients come to me that have hardly trained in a gym at all or don't really know anything about their nutrition. So for them, it might be a 2+ year timeline. But if I get someone who's quite experienced in the gym, they know a lot about their nutrition, and they've proven that they can be quite rigid in their approach and they can stick to something. The preparation might be 16 to 30 weeks, but it all depends on where the person is starting. Like I said, some people just need longer, some people can do shorter, and of course that's the experience side of things. And then next you've got genetics. Some people's genetic capability allows them to be much better at this or a lot worse than this. So there's two factors you have to consider as well.
Oh, wow. So that's it's not as straightforward as that. So then what would be the difference of like the nutrition I should be doing as like a regular person, just living my life, in comparison to like a high performance, bodybuilder or fitness model? What's the difference, would you say, in terms of the nutrition?
Well, I guess it all depends on what that average person's goal would be. But if we look at it from a fat loss perspective, the biggest difference is that someone like a bodybuilder or a fitness model, they have a timeline. So their requirements to be more consistent or more structured are a lot higher because they don't have time to make a mistake here and fix it up. They don't have time to make a mistake there and fix it up. Whereas someone who just wants to lose a bit of weight, they can choose the rate at which they lose that. If they decide they want to have a few days off or a week off, they might, and they can catch that up later. But someone like a bodybuilder or a fitness model, they may not necessarily have the time. So I'd say the biggest thing is having a time or a structure on that goal. And obviously you've got different things like nutritional periodization and how the person might approach it. For example, you know, an average person who just wants to lose some weight, they might not need to diet as harsh. The deficit of calories that they might require is going to be a lot lower than someone of a bodybuilder or a fitness model. They might have to diet a little bit harder and a little bit more aggressively. The biggest thing I think with bodybuilders is that everyone thinks it's just, all right, well, it's the same process, but you just do it for longer. But that's not necessarily the case. That it tends to need to be broken down into phases. So you might have the initial phase where you try and get most of the work done early. You have like a controlled diet break or a maintenance phase in the middle of the prep, and then you chip off the last bits at the end. But that's diving into the deeper end of the pool there. But yeah, that's some key differences, I guess.
That's interesting. And then what is like the fitness part like in terms of lifting and weight training? What's it look like in comparison to athlete versus regular person?
Well, again, it's the same as I mentioned before. It depends on the goal of the regular person, but I'll say from like a fat loss perspective or a muscle gaining or a strength perspective, someone like a bodybuilder or a fitness model during a preparation, let's assume this person is dieting down. Training, just like in nutrition, it does need to be broken into phases, because as we get leaner and as our calories get lower, our energy gets lower, our likelihood of injury gets higher, soft tissue breaks and ligaments and things like that. So typically you would probably have to deload or taper your training a little more frequently, whereas someone who's just after a regular fat loss phase, because their energy availability is going to be higher, the deficit is not as harsh, they may not have to deload as frequently. And obviously, like you have to be a little bit more mindful of your volume calculations. And like bodybuilders, for example, they might be more prone to losing muscle in certain areas or gaining muscle in certain areas easier than others. So you need to take into account the shape and the symmetry of the person. Say we need to direct a certain amount of volume here, certain amount of volume there, certain amount of volume there. Whereas someone who's not really a bodybuilder and just wants to look a little bit better, that might not be as important or as of greater significance than a bodybuilder, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's interesting. So then basically, like as an example, like let's say for instance, for my body type, and I'm in a prep phase, what you're saying is that like as I get closer and I'm reducing, I'm having a bigger deficit, I'm going to maybe lighten the weight to kind of match the deficit because my bones or whatever, I'm not as strong as I am. But it also takes into account the fact that when I get lower in weight, my bicep might shrink and I might need to have that look better. So you might taper that off based on that specific situation.
Correct. Yeah, that's a really good question. So what I tend to do there is, instead of going like, all right, we're going to lighten the load or we're going to reduce the intensity or whatever, you might change your exercise selection. So you might move from something like a barbell back squat to a hack squat or a leg press, because it is lighter on the joints and it is a little bit easier and safer to accumulate higher amounts of volume on machine-based exercises. So that might be something to consider as well as exercise selection. You might move to lower impact exercises. For example, you might go from a barbell bench press to a machine chest press. You might go from a barbell row to a chest supported row, things like that. So there's always ways around it.
That's interesting. Wow, that's a lot different than what you would have initially anticipated. So then, I mean, when you're looking at the competitor or someone who's like going for these competitions and stuff like that, how exactly? So, I guess the question is, do most people, when trying to go for these competitions, how are they basically like managing themselves, like life-wise and everything like that, when they're trying to do, go for the main stage and stuff like that?
Yeah. So you mean just like their job and their everyday living and stuff?
Yeah. Like how do they balance all that stuff out, if they even balance it out?
I mean, like when you undertake a contest prep, you have to be ready for it to rule your life to a certain degree. I know that sounds excessive, but for competitors who have to get truly shredded, like bodybuilders and figure competitors, and even those in all other divisions, they have to get uncomfortably lean if you want to do really well. getting really, really lean, it's not healthy, and it takes a very, very big toll on your physiological, your physical, and your psychological health. So you really need to ensure that you have a really good support system and you have systems in place for you to best manage those other stresses in your life. So things like your job, your relationships, both in and out of work, in and out of the gym, and other things outside of those. You really need to have systems in place to ensure you manage them as best as you can. Contest prep can be quite an isolated life to some degree towards the end mostly. And that's just a part of it that you have to accept. You do have to make sacrifices. And I guess it's the same with anything you do in life, whether it's a relationship or, a new job or a promotion or something. Sometimes you have to make some sacrifices
to make it all work. So then what happens with so after this now, because it sounds like it kind of takes a big toll on your body and everything like that.
Yeah, big time.
So what happens after the competition? Like how do they recover and get back to being good, and what does that look like nutrition wise and exercise wise?
Well, typically after a show, most people are very very heightened in the sense of their hunger hormones are very, very heightened. So their senses, so their taste and their smell and their appetite, they're all extremely heightened. So the first thing your body wants to do is consume more energy or more calories. So typically we try and eat up a little bit after the show, but after that initial phase of maybe like 1 to 2 days of, relaxing and having a bit more food and not training, that's when we need to sort of get back into it and just slowly increase calories over time. I mean, you could take a more aggressive approach, which is what is typically called the recovery diet, where you might increase to maintenance calories over a period of 2 to 6 weeks. Or you could take a reverse diet approach, which takes a little bit longer, but you probably will stay leaner for longer, but it will take you longer to recover. And that typically could last anywhere from 8 to, I've seen people reverse diet for up to 20 weeks. Personally, for me, I prefer to meet somewhere in the middle between the two. I don't like my competitors to put on stupid amounts of fat super fast, because if you do, then you can end up in a really bad place where your maintenance calories are still low, but your body fat is way too high. So then you kind of have to ride out this maintenance phase, do another fat loss phase to get yourself at a good spot to gain, and then start again. So meet in the middle where you can sort of recover, but at the same time maintain, a reasonable physique. There's no need to put on stupid amounts of body fat to gain muscle or to recover, I don't think. It can be very complex.
Yeah, I know it's a lot of stuff involved in this, and it's interesting to kind of look at it from the outside as well. And I think you used to compete as well, right? At one point?
Yeah, I haven't done a show for about 4 years now, but I've competed myself. I've done 5 shows total over the course of 2 seasons.
So what got you into this? Like, what got you into the whole world of like fitness and nutrition and then competing yourself?
Well, I think just as like a male teenager, my motivation to get in the gym was pretty much the same as any other guy. You want to look better, for the ladies, but for me there was more motivation as well. As I grew up playing a lot of sports, so I wanted to perform better at my sports, and I wanted to be bigger and stronger because I was always quite a small boy growing up. I'm not tall, and I was never broad or anything like that. But over time, I got more and more into it. I got more interested in the science about how the body works, how you build muscle, how you lose fat and stuff like that. And I always worked in construction, and then there was a point where we had a bit of a break in work, and I had all this time, and I was like, I'm really into the health and fitness side of things, so maybe I'll do a personal trainer course. So I did that. It took me some time to get that done. Back then, it was actually harder to get your certification. Now it's actually quite easy. So back then, it was a few months full time studying in classes. I think it was like 9 to 4 every day, 5 days a week. And after that, I ended up getting a job running boot camps. Then I ended up getting a job in the gym. And then by that point, I got a call from my old boss from my construction job saying, like, we're ready to go back to work. And I was like, no, I don't think I'm going to come back. I actually enjoy this. And I guess my passion for it grew more and more and more over time. And like I said, I worked with a lot of general population people. And as I did more courses and got a bit more qualified, I had some people ask me about, bodybuilding and fitness modeling. And I started doing that, and then I was lucky. I sort of started doing that when it wasn't as popular. So when it started to become popular, I was already somewhat established as a coach. So I was able to build a business off that quite easily, which is really good. So it was, yeah, I wasn't always like, I didn't grow up wanting to be a personal trainer or anything like that. I kind of just, I don't know, I guess you could say I fell into it and then I just grew to love it.
Wow, that's crazy. That's an awesome journey. I don't know, as you were talking, this made me think about this. Like, what's the mindset of somebody who goes out and like competes? Like, if you could put it into words, like what is the difference in the way of thinking that goes into that?
Well, I don't know. Like, I know what it's like in America, and typically the Americans, they take it a little bit more seriously. But in Australia, it's very, very popular, and I guess like every second person wants to do a show. You know, like you see someone in the gym, it's like, oh, well, who's your coach and when are you competing? And most people will have a coach and they will have a show day.
Wow.
And these are people who have been training for, 3 to 6 months wanting to do a show and stuff like that. But for the people who are really taking it seriously, I guess they've always got to have had an underlying competitive spirit. And you've got to have an attitude of doing whatever the do it whatever it takes approach, like the old school days, that's kind of out the window. But when you get to the extreme end of the sport, like the very lower levels of body fat and the pro ranks and stuff like that, the handbook goes out the window. There's no handbook to say how to get to 6% body fat or whatever that person might get to. So you do have to kind of have a do whatever it takes approach. And I think some people are just born with that and some people aren't. It's kind of like a personality trait. I believe that some people might be able to build it. But for the most part, the people who do really well typically have that attitude already and have potentially competed in, competitive sports over time as well.
They have that it factor. It's like the Jordan effect or something.
Yeah, it's like the Michael Jordan and the LeBron Jameses of the basketball world, right?
Yeah, it's just like they're driven for it, basically. So then,
yeah.
What are some typical mistakes that people make when it comes to nutrition? And I'm just talking broadly from like the regular person to everybody. Like, what are the typical mistakes everyone does?
I think just prioritizing the wrong things. We typically have like what's called like a hierarchy of importance. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but there's a really good pyramid of nutrition importance that was originally put out by Eric Helms. And typically what I see people do is they go straight to the top of the pyramid and they worry about things like what times should I eat, how many meals should I have a day, and what supplements should I take, instead of focusing on things like energy balance, where the fat loss actually comes from, and saying like, all right, how many calories am I eating right now? How many do I need to be eating to lose weight? And start doing that instead of worrying about what fat burner they should have, what type of cardio they should do, or, should they have this many carbs before bed and stuff like that. So I think it's just prioritizing the wrong things is what sets a lot of people back initially.
And then like, what are the things that people should be doing? Oh, actually, I guess you kind of answered that with the things that they kind of mess up with.
Yeah.
And then in terms of like nutrition, I've had different people that I've talked to in terms of the interview series. Is there certain foods that you feel like everyone should eat? I know there's no universal diet. It kind of depends on your body. But is there something that you feel like people just need to be eating in general in terms of the nutrition?
Yeah, I think fruit and vegetables. Like, I think that's just a what's the word? Non-negotiable. It's just a non-negotiable. We need a good amount of micronutrients in our system to live a healthy and happy life. So I think the only non-negotiable for me is fruit and vegetables. I mean, everyone's different and everyone has different food preferences. And I think if people worried more about how much they eat instead of what they eat and what types of foods, we'd probably all be a lot less overweight, so to speak. But again, it comes down to the prioritization of certain things. People are worried about the wrong things, and I think that's what gets them in trouble. But in terms of food, I'd say just fruit and vegetables are a non-negotiable for me.
And then I know some people because I've been seeing a lot of shows and everything talking about veggies and so forth. How does that work into the place of like bodybuilding? Because I think sometimes the concern for some people is that if I'm eating way too much vegetables and I'm not eating enough meat, I'm not getting enough protein, and I'm not going to get big. What's your opinion on that whole perspective?
Well, I think for people like bodybuilders and fitness models, it actually becomes a little bit more important because as your calories get lower, like to get lean, you have to be in a deficit of calories. That's how you lose weight, is energy balance. It's quite simple. But over time, if you're trying to get really lean, your body adapts. So your calories typically have to get lower and lower and lower. And by default, that typically puts us at risk at, deficits of other micronutrients. So fruit and vegetables becomes a little bit more important in making sure you actually consume it, because someone in the off season who's eating in a surplus of calories, they'll be getting a lot of variety of food sources because they can they just by default, they're allowed to eat more. They're able to eat more. That's what they're required to do. When you're in a prep, you're required to eat less. So by default, you're going to be eating a lower variety, meaning you're going to have likely a potential deficit of micronutrients. So even supplementing with things like multivitamins and fish oil is a good idea too, because you might lack things like that. So I would say, like micronutrients is something that we lack in prep. So fruit and vegetables and things like that become a little bit more important.
That's interesting. And actually, I know you kind of mentioned this before and you're like, people always go to this, but I'm just curious. What is like the supplement stack for a meal prep, like a person who's prepping for a competition? What does that look like?
Well, I mean, for everyone, it's going to be different because people have different conditions. People have different food preferences, so they might need to supplement with other things. But in terms of the body of evidence, the most effective supplements, and probably the three that you only need, it's like the triple C method. It's creatine, caffeine, and what are we going to? Yeah, creatine and caffeine, pretty much. They're the only two you really need. Creatine monohydrate is essential it's not essential, but our bodies don't naturally produce it. So we get a little bit of it from red meat, and we do naturally produce it, but not enough to have, a huge benefit. So creatine monohydrate is the most successfully studied supplement out there in terms of types of creatine. So supplementing with that, for anyone with fat loss, strength, muscle gain, anyone should take it. It's really, really effective. And caffeine is really good as well.
Little coffee.
It's actually better than a lot of people think. I hear a lot of people say, I've been trying to cut back on coffee. And I think that's all well and good, because coffee typically for a lot of people who don't really have much of a clue about this stuff comes with, full fat milk, 2 or 3 sugars, sweeteners and stuff like that. But coffee itself and caffeine, it's actually really good.
Good stimulant. Oh, that's interesting. I'm always learning something new every time I have these interviews. It's never what you think. It's like there's always something you thought wasn't good for you, and then you find out, wait, that's good for you? Like,
no, I'm actually wrong about everything.
No, that's actually pretty...
As every time I study something, I always realize how smart I'm not.
Exactly. You're learning every day, man. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, what are you working on right now? Like, what's the big thing that's happening in your life right now?
Currently, I'm studying a postgraduate diploma through the Institute of Sports Performance. They actually just went through a name change, so I'll have to get their actual company name, but that's overseas, so I'm doing that online. It's just a self-paced postgraduate course. So I didn't actually go to university to study nutrition or anything like that, but through doing other courses, we were able to get into this postgraduate program. So I'm currently doing that, and then there's potential to register for a master's degree after that if I choose to.
Nice. Wow, you're going all in.
And I guess just working on, content to put out for my followers and my clients and stuff like that. But that's kind of like an ongoing thing that really never changes.
Awesome. So where can people find you? Is there do you have like a website, or do you have if people wanted to kind of get in touch with you, maybe want to work with you, how would they find you?
Just my Instagram. I don't use a website currently, but I'm just at Joey Cantlin PT.
Okay, awesome.
And my email address is the same, joeycantlinpt@gmail.com.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, I mean, there's always one question I have to ask, and I just always to end it off. I want to know, if you could leave the world with anything from a health perspective, what would be that one thing you would leave the world before you left?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I don't know. There's a lot of things that you could do to change the world to make it, I don't know, a healthier place. I don't know. It's hard to say because I think our biggest problem in the world is just human behavior. And a lot of people just don't understand moderation. I think it comes down to the generation or the era that we live in is people want this and they want it yesterday. And people are just a little bit lazier, a little bit greedier. So I think if we maybe scaled things back and, got rid of things like Uber Eats and delivery and stuff like that, people would be less inclined to eat rubbish. And I am bad for it. I spend way too much money on Uber Eats.
So do I.
So I think just like trying to simplify the world, basically. If you look at obesity rates, like they're way higher than what they were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I think just simplifying existence really, but there's so many things that plug into having to do that as well. So, our healthcare is probably the best it's ever been right now. And we're still getting fatter. So, and unhealthier. So I think just trying to simplify existence and teach people moderation, I guess.
Oh, I think that's big, actually. I think the mindset is actually a major factor that really changes the world. So I think you hit it on the head. Anyway.
Yeah, I think just as people, we need to change it. I think that just plugs into all other bits of life, not just everyone's health and fitness. Like there's a lot of other things that people just need to, I don't know, I guess change.
Well, honestly, Joey, thank you so much for spending the time with us. I actually learned a lot. I think a lot of our listeners and our viewers learned a lot as well. And as I said before, you guys have to check out Joey and what he's working on. And really just take a lot of the information he's provided you to kind of take what you're doing to the next level. So thank you guys once again, and you guys have an awesome week as well. Thanks, Joey.